أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يمحو الله ما يشاء ويثبت وعنده أم الكتاب آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To continue our discussion from last night, there's a question that is often raised, and it's a question that is often presented by the new atheistic movement that we have in this day and age. And that question is a very interesting question, and it's a very delicate, very sensitive question. The question is that if you as Muslims believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers your dua, the Holy Prophet mentions with regards to the month of Ramadan, وَدُعَاءُكُمْ مُسْتَجَابٌ. If you Muslims believe that your du'as are most definitely answered in the month of Ramadan, or outside of the month of Ramadan, then when you become ill, what's the need of going to the doctors? You could sit on your musalla and you can pray to Allah, Allah cure me from my illness. If God really and truly exists, then He will answer your dua and He will cure you from your different ailments and diseases. Likewise, the same can be applied with regards to death, with regards to rizq and sustenance, and so on and so forth. If Allah truly exists, then there's no need to refer to the physical aspects of this world. Connect with Him directly and He will answer your dua. Our ulama came forward and said that this interpretation is batil. It's absolutely false and wrong. They said the reason why it's considered to be false and batil is because dua in itself is spiritual. It's one of the spiritual aspects of our lives. The driving force behind dua, the reason why we engage in dua is because we believe in ilm al-ghayb. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Those who believe in the world of the unseen. Because you and I believe in the world of the unseen, we engage in dua. When you come across a person who does not believe in the world of the unseen, a person who believes that the only thing that exists is what we see and hear and interact with, dua will never emanate from such a person. As for the believers and those who believe in the hereafter and a higher power, they will engage in dua. Dua is spiritual in its essence. Why should we refer to physical aspects to measure whether dua is answered or not? That's the question that the ulama raised. We are physical beings. Because we are physical beings, we compare our physical things with one another. And that's how we measure success from failure. I measure my wealth compared to yours. You measure your wealth compared to mine. You measure, for example, ilm. We measure knowledge with one another. And so on and so forth. Because we're physical beings, we measure physical things with one another to see and distinguish ourselves from one another. Dua is spiritual. You cannot take something physical and measure dua through it, because dua is spiritual, it's not physical. Therefore, if I was to sit on my musalla and say, Ya Allah, increase my rizq, I should not be looking for physical answers from this dua. Because the essence of dua is spiritual. To compare it with something physical, or to compare dua, to measure dua through something which is physical, does not make sense at all. So here the ulama came forward and said that because dua is spiritual, we cannot refer to that which is physical in order to measure it. Spiritual, because dua is spiritual, the answer is spiritual as well. Whether we see it in this world or we see it in the hereafter. Yes, many at times we will see the physical aspects of our du'as. But if we do not see the physical aspects of our du'as, it does not mean that our du'as are rejected and not answered. This is something important that we must bear in mind. Because many of us, for example, will say to Allah, Ya Allah, I've got an exam tomorrow. Allow me to pass this exam. But if I fail, and if the person fails, then all of a sudden he sees himself moving away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Baba, you shouldn't be measuring something physical to something which is spiritual in essence. So that is the first question. In tonight's discussion, I want to speak about what is known as qada and qadr. The idea of free will, predestination, the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determines every aspect of our lives for us. And where does dua fit into all of this? Because we believe as part of the religion of Islam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dictates and ascertains and determines every aspect of our lives. We believe in the profundity of Laylatul Qadr. Laylatul Qadr khayrun min alfi shahr. That the night of power is the night of decree. What's the night of decree? It is the night in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined every aspect of our lives for the following year. And if we were to bring in the discussions of the 15th of Sha'aban, we spoke about this. Yes, at the time of the 15th of Sha'aban, all of this has an interlink, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determines our decree, determines our fate for the following year. Well, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined our fate for the following year, then what's the need of dua? And so again, another question arises. If Allah has determined everything for you, every aspect of your life, then why engage in dua? As in, think about it. If I pray to Allah, Ya Allah, increase my rizq, restore my health. If Allah has decreed for my rizq to be given to me or for my health to be given back to me, then فَبِهَا وَالنِّعْمَةِ, then this is a blessing from Allah. If Allah had already planned to give it to me, then there was no point of dua in the first place, because He's already decreed to give it to me. Likewise, if I turn to Allah and I say, Ya Allah, restore my health, and Allah chooses to not give me my health and He has decreed so, then there's no point in dua either. Because dua, I pray, but then Allah has decided not to give it to me. If I ask you, the mu'mineen, to gather together and pray for me, in the thousands even, Allah will not answer that because He's already decreed not to give it to me. Beyond this, what's interesting is when you look into the lives of the Anbiya and the Awsiya as well, including the A'immat al-Athar. When you look towards their lives and certain parts of their lives, you realize that the A'immat al-Athar was so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that never did they pray for themselves. And this is something outstanding. We alluded to this in the previous majalis. When you look, for example, in the life of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, and there are many, many examples. Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, just before he was thrown into the fire, just before he was catapulted into the fire, Jibreel descends from the heavens. Ya Ibrahim, we are here to help you. He says, I do not need your help. Why not? He says, because Allah will directly help me. There's no need for me to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, the hadith says that Ibrahim turns to Jibreel and he says, Ibrahim says to Jibreel, he says, I'm not in need of asking towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, عِلْمُهُ بِحَالِ يُغْنِ عَنْ سُعَالِ. He says, He knows of my affairs. And because He knows of my affairs, that's enough for me to not ask to Him. Meaning that the Anbiya never would pray for themselves, but they would always reserve their prayers for the people around them. Ibrahim would constantly pray for the guidance of his community and his uncle and so on and so forth. But never did he turn a dua for himself. Ya Allah, protect me or increase my rizq or help me or whatever. No, none of that. In the time of Nabi Musa alayhi salam as well, when Nabi Musa became sick and ill one day, he chose not to go to the doctors. Allah reveals to him, Ya Musa, you're sick, go to the doctor, get some treatment from him. He says, Ya Allah, you know of my affair, and I trust you to cure me from my diseases. And then of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, not the part of the system that I've created is that you go towards the doctors and you get treatment from him. In the times of the A'immat al-Athhar, likewise. You look at the example of Imam Kadhim alayhi salam. When Imam Kadhim was in the prisons, he was in the prisons for many, many years. The Imam could have easily turned to Allah and said, Ya Allah, release me from the prisons. And Allah would have answered his dua. The dua of the Ma'sumina answered without any shadow of a doubt. When Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam saw his Khilafah taken away from him, he could have easily turned to Allah and said, Ya Allah, rectify this mistake that's taken place. Return the Khilafah to me. But no, you find that the A'immat al-Athhar, as well as the Ma'sumin that came before them from the Anbiya, always chose to live the decisions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to live out the decisions made by Allah. Their psychology and their iman told them that at this moment in time, Allah has chosen me to put me through certain trials and tribulations. And because this is seen as a trial and a tribulation for me, I know that Allah has chosen this for me through His wisdom. Who am I to question Allah's wisdom? Who am I to question Allah's knowledge? Because Allah's wisdom dictates that whatever trial and tribulation I go through in my life, it is the best time for me to go through that particular adversity. So never would they pray to come out of that particular adversity. They would choose to live it out for as long as it was. Nabi Yusuf was in the prisons for many, many years. He could have easily turned to Allah and said, Ya Allah, release me from the prisons. But his psychology, his iman was, no, this is a test for me. This is a challenge for me, and I have to live it out. Because Allah has chosen this for me, and it is the best thing for me to go through in my life. So the A'immat al-Athhar, as well as the Anbiya, would never pray towards Allah for their own personal needs. If that's the case, then what's the whole idea of dua? Are we not supposed to follow the Anbiya and the A'immat al-Athhar and take them as role models? If they never prayed for anything for themselves in their lives, we should follow suit as well. Again, question arises, what's the whole point of dua in the first place? The answer to this question, as indicated by the mutakallimin, by the ulama of theology, they said when it comes to the discussions of divine decree, imagine you can envisage divine decree as two books. Each and every one of us has these two books. The first book is the book which is known to be fixed. So whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes in this book is something that has been fixed for each and every one of us, and it cannot change. The second is the book which is a variable book. So whatever is written in this book, it is a decree chosen by Allah, but it can change due or depending on certain circumstances. So the fate mentioned in the second book is within our hands, and through our actions we can change our fate. With regards to the first book, let me give you a few examples. Which decree do we have or has been written for us that we have no authority over and we cannot change? Death is one of them. Kullu nafsin dha'ikatul maut. That every single human being will taste death. You and I can collectively come together on the night of Qadr and pray against death. It won't work. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for each and every one of us that we will die and we will move on to the afterlife. Let me give you another example, the example of the zuhur of Imam al-Hujjah ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. The enemies can come together and pray against the dhuhur of the Imam alayhi salam, but Allah has decreed that his dhuhur will take place and will most definitely take place. So as many as people can come together and pray against the dhuhur of the Imam, it will not be accepted. Why? Because the Imam's dhuhur has been decreed by Allah. It has been finalized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second book is the variable book. The decrees mentioned or written in this book changes depending on our circumstances. Our actions change these variables. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let me give you a few examples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned or has written that in my life I will earn this amount of rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written in this book that I will have this amount of health until at this age, for example, or I will live. Death can be prolonged or postponed, or it can be hastened. Yes, we have this in the riwayat. That I will die, for example, at the age of 65. But depending on our actions, these variables can change. These decrees can change. So if, for example, I was to go give sadaqah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change my decree of risk and will increase it for me. If I was to usurp the rights of, for example, the orphans, then Allah will change my risk and lessen it for me. If I was to engage in silat al-rahim, then Allah will prolong my life and postpone my death date. If I was to perform qat'iyat al-rahim, break off any womb relative relationships, then Allah will hasten my death for me. And we have this within the riwayat, and there are plenty of riwayats mentioning this. They say one day, Nabi Isa alayhi salam, when he passed a particular gathering congregation, the people were celebrating. And they were jubilously celebrating the wedding of two individuals. One of them came towards Isa alayhi salam and said, today is a day of joy and celebration. Upon which the Prophet replies, tomorrow is the day of mourning and tears and sorrow. They asked him why. He said, because the bride will die at night. In the evening, she will die and she will be taken towards the afterlife. And so they were all mourning and they were in the state of grief and sorrow. The next morning, one of the companions saw this woman walking in the street. And he came to Nabi Isa alayhi salam and said, hold on a second, you told us last night that she will leave this world. But I saw her this morning in the marketplace, for example. What happened? Nabi Isa alayhi salam was shocked. So he came towards this woman and said, tell me, what happened last night? Last night it was decreed by Allah that you were to die. But then I see that you are very well and you are alive. What happened? She said, before we entered our house, me and my husband, or my husband and I saw a beggar in the street. I went and I gave some sadaqah. And then I entered the new house, for example, upon which Nabi Isa alayhi salam mentions, he says it is for this act of kindness and sadaqah that Allah chose to prolong your death date. So you have this. Our actions directly impact the destinies written in the second book, the book which changes, and it changes based on our actions. With regards to the dhuhur of the Imam alayhi salam, we mentioned that the dhuhur of the Imam is from the fixed book. Death is from the fixed book as well. But when it comes to the dhuhur of the Imam, we focus only on the time. The time varies from one circumstance to another, doesn't it? We find in the riwayat, for example, if the mu'mineen were to develop a relationship with the Imam, a great relationship, then the Imam will come back. If the Imam will come back quicker than what was originally intended. If we move away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we move away from the Imam, then the postponement, then the dhuhur, the time of his dhuhur will be postponed. And so our actions has a direct effect on the destinies written to us on the second book. Where does dua come into all of this? Now there's a beautiful discussion amongst the madhab or the madahib of Islam. The Sunnah have one interpretation and the Shia have another interpretation. The Sunnah say that because Allah decrees every aspect of our lives, in reality we have no free will. We have the famous case of Abu Hanifa when he visits Imam Qadim alayhi salam, don't we? When he comes to visit the Imam alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says, I've come to visit your father. He says, what for? He says, I have a series of questions for him. He says, what are your questions? Perhaps I can help you. He says that because Allah has decreed all of our actions, it means that Allah controls our actions. Allah has influenced us directly to behave the way we behave. Upon which the Imam, a very young child, 4 or 5 years of age, he says, Ya Abu Hanifa, if that's the case, then what's the whole point of heaven and hell? Reward and punishment. If Allah makes us perform the evil deeds that we perform and the good that we perform, then there is no wisdom behind sending the Anbiya and the Awsiya and so on and so forth. Heaven and hell is rendered meaningless. It says, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to partially be in control of our actions, then again, it doesn't make sense for Allah to punish us for Him being part of our actions as well. Which means that we are totally in control of our actions. The ulama of the Imamiyya came forward and said that within our madhab, we believe that divine decree comes under the fall of free will as well. Free will is infused with regards to divine decree. Let me give you a few examples to make this clear. Allah has decreed that on the 27th of April, for example, I will become sick. If I was to consume this particular dish, it's a conditional statement. I will become sick if I consume this dish. A few days later, I will become better if I was to take medicine. But if I choose not to consume the dish, then I will not become sick. If I choose not to consume the medicine, then my sickness will prolong. Each and every one of us, we have 2 decrees written for us in terms of our actions. If we do this, then this will happen. If we choose not to do it, then it won't happen. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, they say he was standing by a wall one day. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. As he was standing by the wall, he saw the wall move a bit and then he quickly moved away from the wall and the wall collapsed. He turned to his companions and he said that there were 2 decrees written for me. If I was to stand underneath this wall, then I would have died when the wall collapsed on me. But if I was to move away from the wall, then the wall would have not affected me in any way whatsoever. When it comes to dua, understand this. All of this comes under the folds and the discussions of cause and effect, doesn't it? If I was to eat a dish, I will become sick. The effect is that I became sick. I became sick by eating that particular dish. I became better from consuming medicine. This is all comes under the folds of cause and effect. The ulama came forward and said and explained very well. They said that when it comes to dua, dua affects our destinies simply because dua is the cause of our effects. So if there's, for example, a particular hajat that I have in my mind, Ya Allah, restore my health. One of the ways of achieving this effect is through dua, except that dua is not a physical route to that effect. It's a spiritual route to that effect. That I have to maintain both the physical and the spiritual. Physically, I need to consume medicine, I need to consult with the experts and so on and so forth. But at the same time, spiritually, I ask dua and I ask, Ya Allah, restore my health for me. Dua is a cause to the final effect, and this is something that has been reverberated by the ulama. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as it is the month of Ramadan and through the barakah of the month of Ramadan, to give us the tawfiq to increase in our dua, inshaAllah, and to accept our a'mal as little as they are in these holy nights and days. Wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.